Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio will hold his first face-to-face meeting with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi during ASEAN talks in Malaysia, according to media reports. The talks come as Washington threatens 20 to 50% tariffs on over 20 countries by August 1st. The U.S. President Donald Trump has said that the United States will supply weapons to Ukraine through NATO and plans a major statement on Russia on upcoming Monday. This comes as Trump voiced frustration with Russian President Vladimir Putin and a Rome conference pledged $12 billion for Ukraine's reconstruction. The U.S. State Department will soon notify staff affected by job cuts as part of President Donald Trump's diplomatic corps overhaul. Deputy Secretary for Management Michael Rigas said in an email, according to media reports. The UN spokesperson Stephanie Dujarric has said that a United Nations team delivered 75,000 liters of fuel into Gaza on Wednesday, the first such delivery in 130 days, according to media reports. He warned the amount is insufficient for even one day's energy needs and urged for more to avoid service shutdowns. U.S. President Donald Trump has announced a 35% tariff on Canadian imports starting August 1st and plans 15% to 20% tariffs on most other countries. According to reports, Trump has warned Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney that the rate could rise if Canada retaliates, while carve-outs are expected for energy, fertilizer, and USMCA goods. UK's Heathrow Airport has said that it could handle 10 million more passengers annually by 2031 through terminal upgrades if fees rise to $45.07 per passenger, according to media reports. The plan, a 12% capacity increase, comes ahead of a new runway expected no earlier than 2035. Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. will meet U.S. President Donald Trump in Washington this month to discuss increased U.S. tariffs, according to Philippine Foreign Minister Teresa Razalo. Lazaro, speaking at a regional summit in Malaysia, also urged China and ASEAN to conclude South China Sea Code of Conduct talks by 2026. Greece's Cosmos Ship Management has said that one person is confirmed dead and 4 others remain missing after Houthi militants attacked the Liberia-flagged cargo ship Eternity Sea in the Red Sea this week, according to media reports. U.S. President Donald Trump has announced a new 35% tariff on Canadian imports, set to take effect from August 1st, marking a sharp escalation in his expanding trade war. In a letter to Prime Minister Mark Carney, Trump warned the rate could even go higher if Ottawa retaliates. Goods covered under the USMCA deal remain exempt, and energy and fertilizer tariffs will stay unchanged, at least for now. Trump accused Canada of undermining U.S. dairy farmers, enabling fentanyl flows across the border, and erecting unfair trade barriers, calling the trade deficit a threat to American security. Canadian officials say very little fentanyl originates from Canada and that they have beefed up border controls. If Canada works with me to stop the fentanyl, we may adjust this letter, Trump wrote. The move comes amid a wider trade crackdown, with Trump also imposing 50% duties on copper and planning 15 to 20% blanket tariffs on most other U.S. trading partners, including Japan and South Korea. In a new interview, Trump has said not every country would receive a formal warning, stating, "We're just setting our tariffs." Canada, America's second largest trading partner, sent $412 billion worth of goods to the US last year and bought $349 billion in return. Trump's letter did not address ongoing trade negotiations, but said tariffs could be adjusted upwards or downward based on relations. Now we're joined by Dr. Jaijit Bhattacharya. He's a president at CDEPR, joining us live from New Delhi. Thank you, Doctor, for joining us today. Welcome to NewsX World. Now, with Trump warning of even higher tariffs to former ally Canada, and if Canada retaliates, he's warning Canada about retaliation. What do you think are the likely scenarios for a tit-for-tat escalation here, and how could this impact global markets as well?
To begin with, when President Trump has put in the tariffs on Canada, the details of why he has put in the tariffs is sketchy, because he's basically saying that because of fentanyl coming in supposedly from Canada, that's the reason he has put in the tariffs. Now, clearly, it's not in Canada's interest to let such drugs pass through Canada, because it's going to impact the Canadians also. So if there is a proposal on the ground that the US authorities and the Canadian authorities need to work together to stop this joint menace, it's something that the Canadian will jump in either which ways. So linking it to tariffs is something which is difficult to understand and comprehend. And therefore, it's difficult to understand why the tariff has been put in the first place. And therefore, for Canadians to respond, they really don't have a basis to respond, because they don't know why the tariff has been put in the first place. And hence the tit-for-tat tariff escalation is a real possibility, because it just seems that the tariffs have been put arbitrarily from a Canadian perspective. And clearly, what President Trump has also mentioned for Canada is that if they respond, then the tariffs will go up. It reminds us of what happened between the US and China, where it shot up beyond 110, 120%, which really made trade meaningless. It was almost a ban on trade. That is going to significantly impact, in this particular case, both Canada and US, because Canada could respond in terms of the energy exports that they do. There is about $110 billion of energy imports that US does from Canada, and that's going to hurt also. So I think it'll be interesting to watch how things pan out.
And building on that, how is Prime Minister Mark Carney expected to respond, maybe diplomatically as well as economically?
His stance has always been, when he was up for the elections, has been that he will respond very aggressively to what he called as a coercion from the US side on trade issues. So based on his election promises, we expect that he will make some kind of a visible response in terms of counter-trade tariffs, especially in terms of the agricultural goods that are being imported from US. In fact, there are very deep connects in terms of agricultural sector between US and Canada. One is the fertilizer imports from Canada into US, which is critical for the US agriculture. Second is the imports of the finished products, which is agricultural products from US into Canada. So those are places where the Canadian Prime Minister could respond and put a choke on.
And what message does this send to other US allies like Japan and South Korea, especially as Trump prepares broader tariffs without formal warnings?
I think one of the first impact is they'll be questioning what is the definition of an ally, because the allies are being penalized, and are they really an ally, or do we change the definition of what an ally means? So maybe what an ally will mean from now on in geopolitics is somebody which is, or some country which is aligned militarily, but not necessarily from a trade perspective. So the definition of ally becomes much more limited as we move forward. Now, moving forward to the core question you asked, the response will be that they would like to diversify away from the US in terms of both US as a market as well as US as a source of imports. And that really puts the US in the same bracket as China, where people are trying to diversify away from China because of what they did during COVID. And there was a supply chain restriction issue that happened. And the same seems to be evolving for the US. So it's going to lead to a lot of fracturing of the trade, of the global trade as we know as of now.
Thank you, Dr. Jaijit, for sharing that. You will stay with us as we stay on this topic. China's foreign minister says Beijing trusts Southeast Asian countries to withstand U.S. tariff pressure, urging them to defend their legitimate interests and resist unilateralism and bullying. Speaking after talks with regional partners, he said China believes ASEAN nations will stick to principled positions and safeguard the common interests of the region. On security, he vowed to eradicate the tumor of cross-border crimes, calling for stronger action against online gambling and fraud that threaten the people of both countries. Addressing the Thai-Cambodian border dispute, China called for peaceful coexistence and urged both sides to resolve issues through friendly dialogue. He also said China is ready to create new growth points and with Thailand, focusing on the digital economy, AI, green development, and cross-border e-commerce. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Dr. Jaijit. Thank you, Dr. Jaijit, for staying with us. How significant is China's call for ASEAN nations to resist unilateralism and bullying? And is this direct, maybe attack to US's tariffs?
Well, it's not just the direct attack to US tariffs, because then that attack will be limited to what's impacting China. But it's more of China trying to become the new, pole or major power in the geopolitics and geoeconomics of the world, and therefore trying to rally around and be the champion of those who are supposedly getting impacted by the US tariffs. More importantly, China has been actively using the ASEAN countries such as Thailand and Cambodia and Vietnam as a stepping stone for their export. So with the rest of the world trying to diversify away from China because of what happened during COVID, which was a supply chain resilience issue, where China stopped goods from going out of China, which were goods of importance. Therefore, there have been restrictions being put in on China by various entities. And as recent as now, where they put a squeeze on rare earth magnets, which has impacted the most important industry of most economies, which is the automobile industry. So given that China has been trying to use the ASEAN countries as a means of relabeling their goods from made in China to made in, let's say Thailand or Indonesia and so on. And similarly in Europe, they have been using Hungary. In the Americas, they've been using Mexico and Colombia as the stepping stones for access to the American markets. And therefore, it is important in China's perspective that there is no further tariffs being put in on these countries. And therefore, there's a direct economic reason for China to call out Thailand and the other ASEAN countries to safeguard their tariffs in respect to US, so that Chinese goods can continue to flow the way they were flowing.
And according to you, Dr. Jaijit, can Southeast Asian countries realistically withstand US tariff pressure without risking anything, given their trade dependencies on both China as well as the US?
I mean, clearly the largest Southeast Asian economy is not even $1 trillion economy. And therefore, they're 1/30th the size of the US economy. There is absolutely no bargaining power that the Southeast Asian economies have in respect to the US. So they have to have other means of dealing with US. And really, the point is that the US has not asked for what needs to be done from these countries. It's a tariff put in, but what is the quid pro quo there that the US is asking for the tariffs to be restored to a more manageable level? And in that vacuum, it gets very difficult for the ASEAN countries to even respond. So it's going to be a very tough time for these countries because clearly the US is a very large market for them. It's a very critical market for them, but there is no clarity as to what the US expects from them for the trade tariffs to be restored to its former levels.
And Dr. Jaijit, lastly, with China positioning itself as a defender of multilateralism, how credible is that narrative given its own assertive behavior recently, accessing South China Sea and other regional disputes?
Well, as your question itself indicates, the ASEAN countries do look at China very suspiciously for historical reasons and for the actions that China has taken in the recent past. If China is really serious about being the alternate pole, China should open up its own markets, which China hasn't. So if Thailand produces shoes, can those made in Thailand shoes be sold in China? The answer is no. China is a very small market for finished goods from the ASEAN countries. And therefore, what China is offering to ASEAN countries is mostly words and using them as a country for relabeling the made in China goods into the locally manufactured goods. Beyond that, China is not really doing anything significant in that sense, and therefore, I personally doubt that the ASEAN countries will fall for it, and they will continue to look at China in a suspicious manner, as we have seen on a continued basis.
Thank you, Dr. Jaijit, for sharing that insight. You will stay with us as we stay on the topic. Brazil's President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva says he'll seek diplomatic solutions to avoid a trade clash with Washington. But if President Trump's 50% tariffs take effect on August 1st, Brazil will respond in kind. If they're going to charge us 50%, we will charge them 50%. Lula said in a televised interview, citing a new law passed by Brazil's Congress that allows him to retaliate against unilateral trade barriers. Let's listen in to what he had to say.
Nós não abriremos mão da reciprocidade. Enquanto isso, vamos tentar negociar. O mandato de presidente só dura 4 anos. Daqui a pouco, quem sabe ter outro presidente que quer negociar. É importante que ele entenda que aqui no Brasil, quem estabelece as regras é o Brasil. Primeiro, na questão da soberania do Brasil, nós queremos que ele respeite o Brasil.
Lula called for calm, saying he hopes to negotiate first, but warned that his government is ready to restrict imports, suspend U.S. IP rights, and block investments if necessary. In a letter to Lula this week, President Trump linked the tariffs to ongoing legal proceedings against former Brazilian leader Jair Bolsonaro, calling the case against him a witch hunt and a threat to democracy. Lula blamed Bolsonaro and his son Eduardo for influencing Trump's decision, accusing them of putting personal policies ahead of national interests. Meanwhile, Bolsonaro said the U.S. move reflected Brazil's distancing from freedom, claiming the tariffs would never have happened under his leadership. Brazil is America's second largest trading partner in Latin America and a major supplier of agricultural products, including coffee, beef, orange juice, and ethanol. 4 trade sources say the 50% duty could hold Brazilian coffee exports entirely, while lobby groups across Brazil's farming, energy, and banking sectors are urging a diplomatic resolution. Markets felt the heat with shares in plane maker Embraer and top banks like Itaú, Unibanco, and Santander falling on Thursday. Lula said he will form a task force with industry leaders to rethink Brazil's trade strategy with the U.S. Here's what Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva had to say.
Daqueles que têm maior volume de exportação, suco de laranja, aço, a Embraer, que exporta muito para os Estados Unidos, para conversar, para ver qual é a situação deles. Nós vamos tentar fazer todo o processo de negociação que for possível fazer. O Brasil gosta de negociar, o Brasil não gosta de contencioso. E depois que se esgotar as negociações, o Brasil vai aplicar a lei da reciprocidade. E aí os empresários, eu espero que estejam aliados ao governo brasileiro. Vou procurar novos mercados para os produtos brasileiros. Esse é o meu papel, inclusive, de dizer para os empresários, vamos juntos abrir novos mercados. Porque não é fácil, sabe, ele só taxar os outros. Ele também terá consequência nos Estados Unidos.
Now we go back to our discussion with Dr. Jayjit Bhattacharya. He's a president at CDEPR. Thank you, Dr. Jayjit, for staying with us. How serious is the threat of a trade clash between Brazil and the U.S.? And what industries on both sides would be most affected by 50% reciprocal tariff, according to you?
This is a very serious development, same as with Canada. It is going to disrupt the trade quite significantly. And again, it's surprising because the US exports to Brazil was actually increasing. There was about 11.3% increase in exports from US to Brazil. So in that backdrop, why does the US really put such a tariff? It's inexplicable. In terms of the rationale, given that the former president of Brazil is being prosecuted for whatever crimes that he has done, as per the Brazilian rules, that's for the Brazilians to decide. The interference of an outside power into Brazilian politics is and their justice system is clearly not acceptable to the Brazilians. In fact, to put the record in place, the current president was also put behind bars by the previous regime. And that's something internal to Brazil. Connecting it to trade and trying to weigh in on the judicial process in Brazil is clearly not acceptable to the Brazilians. In terms of what impact does it have in Brazil, clearly agricultural products, as you mentioned, soybeans, coffee, sugar, these were very key exports from Brazil to US, but also minerals and metals, a lot of energy, crude oil. In fact, it's being viewed by the Brazilians that the US has its eye on the crude oil being produced in Brazil. In addition, the US was a pretty large market for automobiles and components, including the Embraer and aircrafts. All of that is getting threatened because of this tariff that has been announced yesterday.
And Dr. Jayjit, what does Brazil's new law authorizing tariff retaliation signal about this evolving trade policy, even though they are the second biggest in Latin America as a trade partner to US?
So, clearly the Brazilians will respond. And the current president of Brazil does have the mandate to respond. It's going to impact the Brazilians, but there is no real option available. The situation is very similar to what the Canadians are in, and therefore there will be a response. The question is in what form that response will be. Also, it is not clear whether the tariffs will be applicable on energy. Just like in Canada, where it's not applicable on fertilizer and energy, perhaps the tariffs are not applicable on energy exports from Brazil. But Brazil has very limited headspace to respond, because if it responds, it'll start escalating, and they'll lose out in terms of trade for at least 1 quarter before the reversal starts happening, and that's a significant amount of time in a year. So losing 3-4 months of trade in a year is going to be very, very significant. Also, it's very difficult to find alternate markets for the Brazilians in such a short period of time. And therefore, it'll be interesting to note in what form the Brazilians respond. My guess is, again, they'll be responding primarily on agricultural imports that they have from the US. But that import is very, very limited. Most of their imports are on electronic products, in transportation, chemicals, and energy-related products. And these are something that the Brazilians really need, and they can't have an alternate source of import or very limited alternate source of imports that they will have.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jayjit Bhattacharya, for joining us today and sharing your insight throughout our news. Now we move on to our next news. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said his government is working to maximize the number of hostages freed under a proposed 60-day ceasefire deal. Speaking from Washington, he stressed that final decisions on who is released may not be under Israel's control. Netanyahu also warned that if a permanent ceasefire agreement is not reached by the end of the truce, Israel will resume military operations in Gaza. He repeated that Gaza's demilitarization remains a key condition for lasting peace. Here is what the Israeli Prime Minister has said.
עד היום, ואני אומר את זה, אנחנו עוסקים מול ארגון טרור אכזרי. אנחנו כמובן היינו רוצים לחלץ את כולם, ומבחינתנו כולם הומניטריים. אני רוצים לחלץ את כולם במכה אחת. כאן אנחנו עוסקים בשני שלבים, אבל לא תמיד הבחירה בידינו. אנחנו נעשה הכל כדי שנמקסם את השחרור הזה בצורה המיטבית. לא הכל בידינו. אם זה יכול להיות מושג במשא ומתן, מה טוב. אם זה לא יושג במשא ומתן ב-60 יום, אנחנו נשיג את זה בדרכים אחרות, בהפעלת כוח, הכוח של הצבא הגיבור שלנו.
Now we're joined by Spencer Klitschli. He's a communication strategist joining us live from California. Thank you, Spencer, for joining us today. Good to see you. Netanyahu has mentioned that Israel may not have full control over which hostages are released or who are released. What are the implications of this for both Israel policy and international negotiations?
You know, the idea that he would not have full control over which hostages are released, I mean, on the one hand, of course, because they're in the possession of Hamas, but on the other hand, it seems to me to be indicative of the relatively low priority he has assigned to getting the hostages back while he pursues what appears to be his goal of the eradication of Hamas. And it also just sounds like passing the buck, really. I think that it's widely agreed that Hamas is defeated as a fighting force. And of course, the ideal case would be for them to completely disband and for Gaza to be completely demilitarized. But at what cost? And as Netanyahu continues to pursue this extremely aggressive war in Gaza with the enormous cost to civilians and these daily tragedies we see with women and children being killed, fewer and fewer people, including people who support Israel like I do, can find any justification for this. And so again, I think his words about the hostages can't help but ring hollow.
Yes, Spencer, you will stay with us as we stay on this topic. For the first time in 130 days, the United Nations has delivered fuel into Gaza. A UN team brought in 75,000 liters to support life-saving operations. Officials warn the supply is nowhere near enough. Without more fuel, critical services could collapse. The UN is urging immediate action to prevent humanitarian disaster. Let's listen in to the spokesperson for the Secretary General of the UN.
Yesterday, a UN team managed to bring in about 75,000 liters of fuel from Israel into the Gaza Strip. This is the first such provision in 130 days. As we mentioned yesterday, we and our humanitarian partners need hundreds of thousands of liters of fuel each day to keep essential life-saving and life-sustaining operations going, meaning that the amount entered yesterday isn't sufficient to cover even 1 day of energy requirement. Fuel is still running out and services will shut down if greater volumes do not enter the Gaza Strip immediately.
Now we go back to our guest discussion with Spencer Klitschli. Thank you, Spencer, for staying with us. What are the immediate priorities for this limited fuel supply? Do we know anything for now?
Well, I think as usual, to stop the suffering and death, as you know, hospitals have been shut down or destroyed, and the ones that continue to function are severely limited in what they can do because of this severe lack of fuel. And we've seen this now going on for a year and a half. Again, I would make no suggestion whatsoever that Israel did not have the right to defend itself against the horrifying attack committed by Hamas on October 7th, 2023. But what's happened since then, as I say, has gone well past the defeat of Hamas and the restoration of security for Israel towards this policy that now at the least amounts to ethnic cleansing, has involved a great number of what I think can easily be called war crimes. And as I say, involves these daily tragedies of civilians, including children, being killed either in airstrikes or dying of preventable diseases or potentially dying in incubators shortly after birth, as we're seeing right now. And even when vital supplies of fuel and food and medical supplies have been resumed, they're often at a very restricted level and often are slowed down by extremely careful security checks. Again, security checks are completely understandable, but it's hard to believe there's any serious intention on the part of Netanyahu's government of relieving this horrible suffering. And I know that a great many Israelis themselves are horrified by this. And it's hard to come to any other conclusion that what's really driving this is Netanyahu's personal self-interest. He wants to remain in power, and he especially wants to remain in power because he's in danger of being prosecuted and going to jail if he were to be out of power. And so he, in order to do that, he allies himself with the most extreme and radical and fanatical elements of the right wing in Israel and continues to pursue these inhumane and really inhuman policies.
Thank you very much, Spencer, for sharing that insight. You will stay with us as we stay on the region. Houthi leader Abdul-Malik al-Houthi has reissued a warning to shipping companies operating in Red Sea waters. He says any vessel linked to Israel will be targeted. The statement comes days after Houthis sank 2 ships. Shipping costs have since surged, raising global concerns over maritime security. Here's what the Houthi leader has said.
لا يمكن السماح لأي شركة تقوم بالنقل لبضائع للعدو الإسرائيلي عبر مسرح العمليات المعلن عنه. فالموقف حاسم في هذا الاتجاه، والذي حصل فيه درس واضح لكل شركات النقل البحري التي تتحرك للنقل لصالح العدو الإسرائيلي. ستعامل بكل هذا المستوى من الحزم. موقفنا اليمني هو موقف حازم وحاسم، وقرارنا في منع الملاحة على العدو الإسرائيلي في البحر الأحمر وخليج عدن والبحر العربي في هذا المسرح الواضح للعمليات هو قرار حازم حاسم ثابت مستمر طالما استمر العدو الإسرائيلي في العدوان والحصار على قطاع.
Now we go back to our guest discussion with Spencer Critchley. Spencer, thank you for staying with us. Now we know that they have started, or they have said that they will resume targeting any ships linked to Israel. But earlier there was a warning issued by U.S. that U.S. ships shouldn't be harmed. Do you think that Houthi will maybe stick by that and not only target these any ships that are only solely in connection with Israel?
Of course, it's hard to predict what the Houthis will do. Their behavior in all of this is hard to link to any kind of understandable or legitimate political objective. And of course, it's never acceptable, no matter what one's political objective is, to attack civilian targets, all the more so when those civilian targets are crew members of ships that have absolutely nothing to do with the conflict in Yemen. Anything the Houthis do also has to be seen in the context of their role as allies and proxies of Iran. I'm not an expert in the security and intelligence considerations that would go into this, so I could only speculate about why they would be resurging their attacks now after a period of peace. Threatening American shipping is an extremely risky move for them, of course, because any attack on American shipping would of course, receive an immediate and vigorous response. I would note here as well that one of the problems with the way the Trump administration approaches this and many other situations with its go-it-alone, so-called America First approach is that it would be far better for everybody involved who faces a threat from the Houthis to be working as allies, the way America has traditionally worked with its allies. But as we know from the leaked signal chats involving Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and Vice President Vance and others, the top levels of the American government feel contempt for our European allies and feel they should be left to their own defenses in situations like this. So it would be far better for the forces of civilization and order to be behaving as allies here in responding instead of everybody being divided and being forced to go it alone because of this sort of activity. So there's multiple dimensions to this, and I think as alarming as it is to see these individual incidents, it's also important to keep them within the overall context.
Thank you very much, Spencer Critchley, for joining us and sharing that insight as communication strategist all the way from US. Thank you very much. Now we move on to our next news. US President Donald Trump has said that the United States would supply weapons to Ukraine via NATO and that he would make a major statement on Russia on coming Monday. Trump has outlined what he described as a new arrangement involving the US, NATO, and Ukraine for the transfer of American weapons. He described that the weapons that are going out are going to NATO, and then NATO is going to be giving those weapons to Ukraine and also paying for them. According to him, NATO is going to be reimbursed the full cost of those weapons. As per reports, Trump's team will identify arms from US stockpiles to send to Ukraine under the Presidential Drawdown Authority, which allows the president to draw from weapons stocks to help allies in an emergency. He said the deal was finalized during the NATO summit last month, where Trump signaled support for sending more Patriot missiles to Ukraine. This comes after Trump recently expressed frustration with Washington President Vladimir Putin over the lack of progress towards ending the war in Ukraine. Trump has also said that he's disappointed in Russia but is waiting to see what will happen in the next couple of weeks. Now we go to guest discussion with Dr. Satoru Nagao. He's a fellow at Hudson Institute. Thank you, Dr. Satoru, for joining us today. How practical and enforceable is Trump's claim that NATO will reimburse? And do you think that this U.S. supporting Ukraine with weapons, will it maybe continue or be a push to continue war in Ukraine and no hint of ceasefire here?
U.S. move to provide weapon is reactive move. So Russia intensifies military activity, military operation, and the U.S. need to respond it. That is the pattern. But why Russia intensifies their attack is a matter of concern. When we check the military operation, we should focus both will and capability. View from the will, the Russia want to intensify the pressure to the Ukraine because this high-level attack had started in middle of May or end of May and continue in June. So 5,000 drones attack Ukraine in June in 1 month. compared with the past, this is far bigger military operation Russia is committing. So this means that direct negotiation between Russia and Ukraine started the middle of May. So as a negotiation card, Russia want to increase the pressure to Ukraine is one of the reasons. And June 1st, the Ukraine used the drone to attack the strategic bombers in Russia, and this was a very successful military operation. But view from Russia, Russia want to retaliate. That is another reason to do that. These ones are related with the will side. So about the capability, what can we say? In case of the capability, because Russia has enough number of the drones and missiles, they can do that. But why they can get so many drones and missiles related with the capability of the military industry? Winston Churchill, of the British Prime Minister in the past, mentioned how to develop the defense industry, military industry. He said when they invest, first year, no production, only investment. Second year, a little production. Third year, many massive size production. And fourth year is fraud, he said. So Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022. This means that this is the fourth year, but the end of the third year has already come. Russia has started to expand their military industry from the first year of this war. So that is the reason they have already entered the fourth year level of the military production. And North Korea and Iran support this. And in case of China, China provides the material to produce the weapons. But instead of the Russia, European countries hesitate to invest in military industries in the past, because if the company expands the production line, but the war ends immediately, in this case, investment is wasting money. So that's why in the Western countries hesitate to invest when Russia invaded Ukraine as the first year and second year that time. So that was the reason. Still, the Western countries' military industry hasn't entered the fourth year level of the military industry development. So that's why Ukraine side lacks enough number of missiles. Russia side has many drones. That is the situation. So in the near future, next year, maybe if war continue, Western side military industry will enter the fourth level. They will create many products, I think. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Satoru, for sharing that insight. You will stay with us as we stay on this topic. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, during a press conference in Rome, has announced that he is considering appointing Defense Minister Rustem Umerov as Ukraine's next ambassador to the U.S. Zelensky has confirmed plans to replace Ukraine's current ambassador in Washington, Oksana Markarova, who has held the post since 2021. He said that he will decide who will replace her in the near future. According to Zelensky, the decision was made to appoint its defense minister as ambassador to the U.S. to strengthen military support through weapons. Zelensky's statement comes just days after reports came out that Umerov was on Kyiv's list of the candidates for ambassador to the U.S. along with Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal, Deputy Prime Minister Olha Stefanishyna, and Energy Minister Herman Halushchenko. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Dr. Satoru Nagao. Thank you, Doctor, for staying with us. What does President Zelensky's consideration of Defense Minister Rustem Umerov as ambassador to the U.S. signal about Ukraine's current diplomatic priorities with Washington?
Of course, President Zelensky wants to change the mood between the U.S. and Ukraine, I think. Because last 7 months and half a year since President Trump sworn in, relation between the U.S. and Ukraine hasn't moved smoothly. So that's why Now the President Trump start to understand how important Ukraine again, the Ukraine side believe. So now is the time to change the mood by choosing the new minister or new ambassador, this leadership to deal with the United States. So that is the timing he believe, I guess.
Thank you very much for sharing that insight. You will stay with us as we stay on this topic. 1 year after surviving an assassination attempt, President Donald Trump is speaking out in a Fox News interview. Trump called the incident in Butler, Pennsylvania, unforgettable. He recounted the moment of gunfire broke out during his campaign rally, saying he was struck but managed to take cover quickly. He praised the sniper who took down the attacker with a single shot in just seconds. Trump also paid tribute to Corey, a firefighter killed in the attack. Reflecting on security failures, Trump said the FBI and Secret Service made mistakes that day, including a lack of presence in a key building and poor coordination with local police. He stressed that despite the lapses, he has confidence in federal agencies and called the attempt a rough day for security forces. Now we go to our guest, Irina Zuckerman. She's a senior journalist joining us live from New York. Thank you, Irina, for joining us today. How credible are the concerns that he raised about FBI and Secret Service coordination failures, according to you?
Look, there were many mistakes made, apparently. To some extent, the criticism is about adjusting the concerns that the Secret Service did not react sufficiently, but to some extent, the events of that day became an opportunity for a loyalty test and a rallying cry, and criticizing security agencies has already been in vogue even before that happened. So this just gave more ammunition to Trump allies and to Trump himself to call for serious reforms, reorganizations of these agencies, and for replacement of a large number of personnel with loyalists. During the campaign, this was an opportunity to galvanize the U.S. base by portraying these security agencies as in a conspiratorial way, and also by calling them infiltrated by the political left, by the media, by the deep state, or otherwise unaccountable, incompetent, or even complicit in assorted disasters.
Thank you, Irina, for sharing that insight. You will stay with us as we stay on the topic. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is in Malaysia for the ASEAN summit, where he is holding high-level talks with key regional leaders. Today, Rubio met with Japanese and Philippine counterparts as part of a broader push to reaffirm U.S. commitment to the Indo-Pacific. He's also scheduled to meet Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi on the sidelines of the summit. Marking their first face-to-face meeting, the visit comes amid rising trade tensions and U.S. tariffs on allies and rivals alike. Rubio is expected to press concerns over China's support for Russia and push Washington's case as the region's preferred partner. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Irina Zuckerman. She's a senior journalist. Thank you, Irina, for staying with us. How do you think how effective can Marco Rubio's visit be in reassuring Indo-Pacific allies of U.S.'s commitment, especially as they push for more tariffs?
The standpoint of whether this is the right forum to do so, it could be very effective if the administration is serious about its commitments. ASEAN has become increasingly an important forum for security discussions. However, we have seen that previous attempts to reassure allies have not fully succeeded. We have seen that Defense Secretary Hegseth, for instance, railed about U.S. essentially becoming less of a pillar for regional security in the Indo-Pacific. There is of course a focus on operationalizing joint defense initiatives, which is something practical that could reassure and create an opportunity for strengthen relations in a practical ways, for refining rules of engagement in disputed waters, and expanding the logistical reach of the enhanced defense cooperation agreement with the Philippines in particular. All of those signs are welcomed by these countries. But on the other hand, the disputes over trade are casting a very serious shadows, and it's not possible to completely separate them from defense and security issues. First of all, part of the economic and trade agreements between these countries and the U.S. include defense discussions and components and import of important technology. Second, trade is actually in itself is an important part of the economy that allows countries to expand their defense budgets, and significant strain over imports into the United States could undermine that cooperation. And third, the general tone that has become extremely aggressive is sending the wrong message both to the allies and to the adversaries. The Trump administration is acting in a transactional way. It's trying to keep defense issues separate from trade issues and believes that tariffs are entirely distinct, but that is not how most countries view it, and any signs of dispute affect other possibilities of cooperation. I think unless there is a tone struck that essentially provides an opportunity to find a more productive, constructive, and friendly way to resolve these disputes, I don't think that this discussion will be as successful as the administration would like.
Thank you very much, Irina, for sharing that insight. You will stay with us as we stay on the topic. The U.S. State Department is moving ahead with a major reorganization plan. Approved after a Supreme Court ruling, spokesperson Tammy Bruce confirmed the implementation has begun and will move quickly. The plan aims to streamline operations and align with President Trump's America First priorities. The reconstruction follows an executive order calling for mass layoffs across multiple federal agencies. The administration says it wants to cut bureaucracy and boost efficiency across government departments. Let's listen into what the U.S. State Department press secretary had to say.
And finally, as many of you would know, the department is also undertaking a historic reorganization. As announced by Secretary Rubio on April 22nd, to better align workforce activities and programs with the America First foreign policy priorities. The Supreme Court's recent near-unanimous decision allows the reorganization to commence and will ensure that the department moves at the speed of relevancy and restores the department to its roots of results-driven democracy. The plan, which has been approved by the Secretary and developed with extensive feedback from Congress and the workforce itself, is moving into implementation.
Now we move back to our guest discussion with Irina Zuckerman. Thank you, Irina, for staying with us. How might the State Department's reorganization impact U.S. diplomatic efforts and foreign policy execution amid calls to streamline and cut bureaucracy, according to you?
In many ways, it's more than just a simple bureaucratic overhaul. It represents a doctrinal shift which reflects the interests and views of the Trump administration. It's what we will see is a much more centralized State Department with much more ideological alignment towards the Trump administration and away from the civil servant class, and a lot more operational streamlining. The restructuring involves 5 major components. First is the consolidation of regional bureaus, which aims to eliminate perceived redundancy and enhance responsiveness to the White House priorities. a lot of people have concern about it because this reorganization could eliminate many distinct offices related to various developing countries, including many offices in Africa. Whether or not that will be the case remains to be seen. Second, offices related to human rights, democracy promotion, and civil society engagement are either being merged or dissolved altogether, which reflects a philosophical departure from liberal internationalism of the prior administrations towards much more transactional diplomacy, which we can expect more of under Trump. And any future administrations will have a hard time reorganizing it back because it would require resources and time to restructure again. Third, USAID is being brought integrated into the State Department and brought into closer alignment with the National Security Council and the rest of the State Department, reducing operational independence and making development aid a more explicit tool of leverage and in general a much smaller component of policy. Fourth, the Bureau of International Organizations is undergoing reorientation with less emphasis on UN consensus building and more focus on bilateral pressure and targeted multilateralism, again reflecting Trump's approach to foreign policy. In his first term, we saw a shift away from multilateralism and much more towards bilateral relations. We're seeing much more of the same in his second term. Finally, the diplomatic security service and public diplomacy bureaus are being outfitted with new leadership and directives prioritizing counter-disinformation, cyber policy, and ideological competition with adversaries like China, Russia, and Iran. That should be interesting because at the same time the administration is eliminating many of those components from other functions of the State Department as well as other agencies and reducing cyber operation related to Russia in its enforcement bureaus such as the FBI. Moreover, many of the functionaries in various that work for the White House and in the administration seem to have an isolationist perspective or pro-Russian or somewhat China-oriented perspective. How that will work with this reorientation towards counter-disinformation against all those countries raises a lot of questions and concerns in the general public and critics and even among more hawkish Republicans as well.
Thank you very much, Irina, for joining us today and sharing your insight throughout our news. Now we move on to our next segment. Let's take a look at some stories from the world of business. NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang met with President Donald Trump at the White House on Thursday. As the tech giant made history, NVIDIA closed the trading day with a market cap above $4 trillion, becoming the first company to do so, surpassing Apple and Microsoft. The milestone comes amid surging investor confidence and AI-driven growth. Earlier that day, Trump praised NVIDIA on social media, touting the stock's 47% surge since his administration's tariff policies and claiming the country's back. In a notable shift, a Shanghai regulator held a meeting this week to discuss strategic responses to stable coins and digital currencies. Despite China's ban on crypto trading, the meeting led by the Shanghai State-Owned Assets Supervision and Administration Commission signals growing interest in digital finance. Regulator He Qing stressed the need for greater sensitivity to emerging technologies and called for stronger research into digital currencies. According to reports, Google will heavily discount cloud computing services for the United States government in a deal that could be finalized within weeks. This comes after Oracle offered the U.S. federal government agencies a significant discount on both cloud and computing and software, according to the General Services Administration. US and European stock futures have slipped in Asia after President Donald Trump escalated tariff threats against Canada and Europe. Nasdaq, S&P 500 and Euro Stoxx 50 futures all dropped 0.4%, while the dollar climbed against the euro and Canadian dollar. Meanwhile, the MSCI's broadest index of Asia-Pacific shares outside Japan wobbled but ended up 0.5% on the day, bringing its weekly gain to 0.7%. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.